Welcome back to another episode of Coffee and Coin. This is part 2 of our 6-part series on building your financial foundation from the ground up, because we have to start from the bottom and work our way up to the top. Last time we talked about what wealth can enable in your life and how creating this strong foundation is the key to ultimately achieving financial freedom. So this week, we're tackling step 1 of the Factora Financial Framework, which we will include in the show notes. And it is all about eliminating high interest debt, because high interest debt is going to steal from your ability to build wealth. So I have had a personal debt journey. I'm sure all of you listeners have had some experience with debt yourselves. Um, Giving you a little context, the first time I ever got credit cards was when I graduated from college. My mom actually gave me 3 credit cards that she had opened up in my name without me knowing about it. And she had been pulling cash off of those cards to help pay for my rent. So this was kind of a rude awakening into credit cards. I got this debt from my mom that I didn't know about. And she said, "You're an adult now. You need to figure it out and pay these down." And I didn't really know what it all meant. I didn't even know what APR stood for at the time. I didn't understand credit limit, credit utilization, how important your credit card score was. And so I went and did the dumb 18-year-old thing that you do when you're not properly educated on something. And I continued to slam those credit cards until I had used all of the money on all 3 of them. They were almost slammed, but I went ahead and got them the rest of the way. So this was a rough start to understanding debt. Those credit cards had very high interest rates on them, between 20 and 25%. And I got stuck in that hamster wheel cycle of paying just the minimums, because that's all I could afford at the start of my career, month over month, and not understanding how much I was actually paying in the end for the small amount that had actually been utilized initially. Let's talk about what debt looks like in the US. Last year, the average American household had over $96,000 in debt. Now, this is made up of all sorts of debt, so that's including credit cards, student loans, car loans, etc. But I just want you to recognize as a listener that paying down debt is a very normal thing. A lot of us want cars, want an education, and so we have debt. You're not alone if you have debt. There's nothing wrong with taking on debt, but you need to understand debt so that if you do take it on, I like to call it debt with a plan, is a lot better of a place to be than having debt that you don't really understand and you have no plan for getting out of. So, today we're going to talk about how to figure out when you should be prioritizing paying off your debt completely versus balancing that with your other goals, such as savings, having an emergency fund, or investing. So, one of the things you need to understand is whether your debt is carrying a high or a low interest rate. And the thing I'm not going to do in this episode is define what constitutes a high interest rate and what constitutes a low one, because the interest rates are always going to move up and down. So if you think about your savings account is going to give you an APY. So that's an annual percentage yield. It's going to give you some interest for keeping your account there. But that interest rate is not going to stay stagnant. It's going to go up and down based on the Fed. So a few years ago, before we went into the pandemic world, we had some higher interest rates that we were seeing for savings accounts, around 2.5%. Those plummeted almost down to zero. And now, as the government is trying to get the inflation under control and they're raising the rates, you are seeing your high yield savings account go up again, currently in November of 2022, around 2.5% again. I'm telling you that because for the finance leaders who dictate what is high interest, what is low interest, I think that that is a very dangerous place to be because rates are always changing. What you really need to understand more than that, because it is subjective, is how it all works together. So, what I mean by that is if you are carrying debt at, let's say, 3.5%, that's one of my home mortgage amounts, and you are able to be earning a return in the market or on some other investment of around 10%, that delta of about 6.5% is great. So I want to be prioritizing money to that investment that can get me that 10% return and only paying the minimum on that 3.5% debt because that's such a significant delta. If I was so focused on paying off the 3.5% until it was all done, and a mortgage, mine is a 30-year fixed rate, then I'd be spending a lot of time over here on my mortgage and missing out on all this time over here on my investments where they can be earning a return over a long time period. So personal finance really is that. It's personal. It's based on your current financial situation, your life goals, because all those goals are going to have financial costs to them, and a balancing act of what to do when. So that is why you're never going to hear me say this constitutes high interest, this constitutes low interest, because it is going to depend on you and what you're trying to do. But there are some obvious ones like the mortgage rates when they were so low, hovering at around 3%, which is why everyone took advantage of refinancing. Or if they didn't, they might have a little bit of a regret situation right now. That those are clearly lower in the range of debt. So let's first of all talk about what high interest means and define it. So the interest rate on a loan is typically noted on an annual basis called annual percentage rate, or for short, you'll hear the acronym APR. And this is the amount that a lender is charging you to borrow that money. And it's calculated as a percentage of the principal, so the amount loaned. Okay. Interest rates, as I'm telling you, can vary pretty widely. So I've seen student loans at around 3 to 7%. I've seen credit cards anywhere from 16 to 25%. Mortgages, we're seeing those at around 7% right now, but they were as low as 3% even just last year. So those are APRs that you are paying to a lender. But if you can get your money properly invested, then you can be the one making a return on your money. So, for example, the average annual rate of return on the stock market, meaning how much money you can earn over the last 100 years, has hovered around 10%. So at Factora, we often use the number 8% because that is net of inflation. We're taking inflation out. We're accounting for it, I should say. So what does this mean? This means you have to look at all interest and what you're doing with your money, because if the interest rate on your debt is costing you more than you could be earning from your investments, then you're not going to be able to really make a return because you're paying a lender more than it costs you to put your money into investments and make a return. But if the interest rate on your debt is costing you less than you could earn from an investment, say the stock market at 8%, then you could be earning that delta from your investment still. So I want to talk you through an example of how high interest debt really does steal from your ability to build wealth and why you want to be very cognizant of it. and why in the beginning of the financial framework, we teach you how to think about your debt, how to understand all of your debts, and how to build a plan for at least eliminating the high interest debts so that you can focus on investing. So let's imagine that you have a $10,000 credit card. You've spent all the money, right? So you have $10,000 in charges, and that credit card has a 20% annual percentage rate. The monthly minimum payments on this card would be around $193, meaning that if you were only to pay those monthly minimums, that after 10 years, you would have finally paid off the credit card company for those initial $10,000 worth of charges, but you really would have ended up paying $23,000 over time for what was only $10,000 worth of charges. After 10 years, you finally have an account balance of zero and no more 20% interest debt. But let's say you didn't have that high interest credit card debt payment that you had to pay for monthly. And instead, you could take that same $193 amount and invest it into the stock market with an average annual return of 8%. In this situation, after 10 years, you would have paid yourself $23,000 and accrued $12,500 in investment returns, giving you an account balance of $35,500 after 10 years instead of zero. So do you see the big difference here? This is called compound interest, and you can either pay it to a lender or earn it for yourself, which is why the sooner you can understand it and get the power of compounding working for you rather than against you, the better off you'll be at building wealth. And Einstein has a really great quote about this. He said, "Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. She who understands it earns it. She who doesn't pays it." Now, Einstein lived a long time ago, so that quote actually said he, but I like to change it for she for our Factora audience because you get it, right? It is so easy to not pay attention and think, it's just a nominal interest payment on my debt, not a big deal. But once you recognize how much that payout is over time, it can be quite shocking. Even on those low interest payments, like that mortgage I shared with you, if you weren't paying 3.5% compounding year over year, your house would be the actual cost you bought it for, not that plus so much money in interest. This is why Factora spends time teaching you how to evaluate your money today. So what are you currently doing with it? What are your debt obligations? How much is your debt costing you? And what investing could mean for your future. Because if you can't understand how it all works on the same spectrum, it's really easy to ignore and work over here just paying debt as it comes and not considering how to invest so that you're in a much better place in the future. But before anyone goes all in on investing, there's something really crucial to consider, and that is whether or not you have an emergency fund at the ready. Because in order to prevent someone from going further into debt, you want to have cash at the ready to pay for whatever unexpected bills or wild situations are going to occur, rather than having to charge them to a credit card you're already not able to pay off in full each month. Or maybe you were able to pay off that bill in full each month until you had a whopping $5,000 surprise and you didn't have an emergency fund at the ready to deal with that. So in the Wealth Circle, we share a really helpful resource called the Debt Quadrant. And I'm going to give you a quick overview, although it's a little harder to understand without the visuals that we show in a Factora Wealth Circle. But there's effectively 3 parts to this quadrant. Let's talk about what happens if you have high interest debt first. If you have high interest debt and no emergency fund at the ready, we want you to focus on getting an emergency fund up to at least 50% before you're paying down debt beyond those minimums. Obviously, you want to be paying minimums every month. Otherwise, you're going to wreck your credit score and have more financial troubles. So that is step one. High interest debt and no emergency fund. You got to get that emergency fund up to at least half before you start aggressively paying down debt. Now, if you have high interest debt and you already have at least 50% of your emergency fund filled, now you can start paying off debt more aggressively and then finish filling your emergency fund in tandem before you continue investing even more. Otherwise, if you only have low interest debt, then you have a lot more options, right? You're definitely paying the minimums because we always have to do that, but you can choose how you want to fill your emergency fund while investing simultaneously because you don't have that high interest debt obligation that can pull you down quickly. So ultimately, it's up to you to determine which strategy makes the most sense for you and your current situation. We always like women to evaluate their risk tolerance when they go through the Well Circle. Some women say, hey, I actually want to have 12 months of fixed expenses in my emergency fund to feel really confident before I start investing. And other women are a lot more risk tolerant and are fine with just a few months. But it's important to consider the cost of your debt and the opportunity cost of not investing. So this is what we help you do so you can determine how to prioritize your monthly income. That was our How to Eliminate High Interest Debt episode. Next time, we are going to move up the financial framework and talk about spending based on your values, which is truly the counterpart to eliminating debt. Because when you have a values-based spending system, not a budget, budgets don't work. They're like diets. They're too restrictive. But when you can spend based on your values, it's going to help support your ability to build wealth and help you avoid purchases and liabilities that don't add value to your life so that we can eliminate high interest debt and focus on continuing building this solid financial foundation that we need to achieve freedom. That's it for me. I will see you in the next episode. If you enjoyed this episode, come join us in a Well Circle. It's our live, online, 12-week course and community where we teach you how to create a personalized financial plan alongside hundreds of other women building wealth. It will change your life and your money for good. You can apply at factorawealth.com/wealth circle. That's factorawealth.com/wealth circle. See you in the next episode.